Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos over here, and we like to take deep dives into great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly very obscure and difficult readings that may be a little bit technical, or just introducing a lot of kind of different concepts. And there are things that I don't necessarily feel like I have mastery over, and so we just kind of read through them verbatim, and I make a few editorial comments. Sometimes I feel like I have enough mastery over the topic to condense it and present it just in my own words, but sometimes not. So today we are on our 225th day of going over the reciprocal church, which is kind of a concept that I'm borrowing from Dewey B. Larson and his reciprocal system of theory, which is really the greatest grand unified theory that there is, unifying all the fields of science and social sciences and religion under one overarching theory, which is elegantly simple, although it can spiral into being more complex. But at the basic level, I've done I think like 580 some videos on the reciprocal system. So if you'd like to check those out, you might want to start at the front. His readings are very difficult, I'll say that, but definitely worth it. Now, but we're just using his concept of reciprocal church because we're trying to put together spiritual resources so that we can use them in a syncretic process to kind of get closer to what we consider the divine, the creative in our lives, love, or whatever it is that is kind of special in life that we see, that kind of Dewey Larson calls it Sector 3, the numinous. And so we've gone over things like Tree of Life, and some ecstatic music, and we're going to get some more into entheogens, sacred geometry and mathematics, intense endurance exercise. These are all things that can bring that, also very deep meditation, get you into exotic states of mind, and these are things that can bring you to recognize the higher intelligence that is immanent in our universal journey. But we feel like this is important because the Western religions are on the verge of collapse as a result of them not being true. And the research is out there at this point, but it just hasn't kind of seeped into the zeitgeist quite enough yet. But it is more and more. And so we're looking at one of these books of New Testament scholarship, a New Testament scholarship by Michael Menescot's, called Christianity's Origins, a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And he's one of many scholars out there who contend that the New Testament was, at least the Gospels in Menescot's case, was written by the Romans as part of a psychological operation with many different purposes, but One is to mellow out the Jews, who were a big thorn in the side of the Romans for at least 100, 150 years before this, and then even years after this. The particular Caesars who were in charge of this were Vespasian and Titus, and possibly Domitian. That's the Flavian dynasty of Caesars from 69 to 96 AD. They wrote and backdated stories about the Gospels, and then the things that Jesus prophesies in the Gospels, predicts that are going to happen. These things actually did happen literally in the history called Wars of the Jews by Josephus. So when Jesus predicts something is going to happen, that thing is actually happens literally by Titus or Vespasian, who are the generals who are fighting in this war against the Jews. They become emperor after their generals. But so Josephus is the person that we need to be focused on, and Josephus was writing at the court of the Caesars at this time period for really the last 30 years of his life, if you believe that he even existed. But according to his autobiography, he's living at the court of the Caesars. He's an adopted family member of Vespasian and Titus. So when you look at him as writing a history, that would be naive. It's definitely propaganda, and probably the events occurred fairly similarly to how they're presented, but the details are inserted in order to work with the Gospels, who were written by the same sources. And so you can tell that they're written together because sometimes Luke, the book of Luke, or the Gospels in general, but he focuses on the book of Luke. The book of Luke parallels or parodies the Wars of the Jews, but then sometimes Wars of the Jews parodies Luke. And so there's a kind of a reciprocity there that shows that they were written together as one unified work. And in fact, many early Christians actually did have Josephus's Wars of the Jews as part of their canonical Bible. And even today, the preterist sect still does have Josephus' Wars of the Jews as part of their canonical Bible. So that's not too far-fetched. But anyway, when you look at the Romans, they have all, I mean, it's completely logical. They had the means, they had the motive, they had the opportunity, and I think even most important, they had the method. They were masters of creating religions. The Romans created many religions. And so Christianity is just one of them. Probably the most successful one as far as, living on in perpetuity. But as soon as we figure this out, because Menescot's really proves it, because what he does is he plots the points. So the book of Luke is on the vertical axis and Wars of the Jews is on the horizontal axis. And all of the parallels are plotted as points. And then when you look at your graph, after plotting all the points, it makes 5 Roman letters, APTVS. That's not a coincidence. Whoever did this did it on purpose and signed their name to it, APTVS. I think that stands for Arius Piso Titus Vespasianus. And again, you can see that in the thumbnail. That's where the the graph, the cumulative graph of Menescot's appears. And you can see that, Wars of the Jews goes by paragraph, Book of Luke goes by chapter. But it doesn't really matter. You could go by word or by sentence or whatever. It would still be approximately the same graph, and it would still spell out the same letters. Okay, now we are, not too far into this book yet, but a chapter or so, and he's talking about kind of what he thinks about Wars of the Jews. He believes, and he's already kind of into the weeds. I wish he would just present his main points first, but he's talking about how he thinks that Wars of the Jews was written in 2 installments. The second half of it, really books 3 through 7, were written first, and then which is the TVS part, or possibly just the VS part. And then the AP and possibly the T were written later. And I think he says that because at the beginning, most of it is the War of the Jews parodying Luke. But then at the end, it's mostly Luke parodying Wars of the Jews. So that's his hypothesis, is that the early part of the book was written later, and that also makes sense because Wars of the Jews is supposed to be covering this Jewish war against the Romans from 66 to 73 AD, and book 1 really starts back at like 150 BC. So it takes book 1, book 2, and part of book 3 just to get up to the period that's covered by the history. So it could have certainly been written in later as an introduction. And he says that the parallels from the earlier parts of Wars of the Jews are not as intricate and creative. They're more just kind of there to put in a dot. But the later books of Wars of the Jews are put together with a lot more care, and that the parallels with the book of Luke are much more entwined and more like a riddle than they are just kind of one kind of one word matching with another word or something like that. So now he's talking, the question he's asking is, what about the line of dots before the V? So if you look at the chart, there is a little part of the V that's anomalous. There's a little bit of it could be like a cursive writing. I don't know if they had cursive writing at this time, but so there are about 10 or 12 dots that don't quite fit the pattern. So he's trying to explain those away here. When the parallels between Luke and Jewish war are plotted, they are seen to form lines, which in turn form 5 Latin letters. However, between the T and the V, there is a group which do not fit this pattern. This anomalous group are important to the first revelation, together with some later ones. Now, this first revelation is to recognize that Jesus is a prophet. I think maybe, yeah, I think that's what there are 4 different steps that he says that you get initiated into these this Flavian secrecy cult. So this anomalous group are important to the first revelation, together with some later ones. They are the series of parallels between Titus and Jesus, which would be shown to initiates to convince them that Emperor Titus, or in the original version, Emperor Vespasian, was Jesus' second coming. It seems likely that this design was implemented in the first non-surviving version of Jewish war, and perhaps it was created early on in the editing process. Perhaps there was a stage that predates the decision to arrange additional parallels to create a VS, in which the original plan didn't involve plotting anything in 2D, but rather simply arranging the parallels in order. Having then decided that the result should display Vespasian signifier VS, perhaps it was agreed that the anomalous group are still needed for the first revelation, and the decision was made to leave them there. This seems like it should be much later in the book, but I see two possibilities for how this issue is going to be brushed aside. Since the diagonal line was to be revealed to show Jesus' story is parallel with the emperor's story, perhaps the followers being trusted with this information would be told that it wasn't part of the final signature. Another possibility is that the faithful initiates were going to be told that Luke chapter 24, verses 4 to 8, where Jesus tells them to remember the events at Galilee, is saying that this is the location where the parallels relating to Galilee should be put. Since if you do this, so basically you're taking that whole section of 10 or 12 parallels, maybe 15 parallels, and you're moving them from really, most of them were in Luke chapters 4 through 8, and you're moving them up to Luke 24, because in Luke 24 Jesus tells them to remember the events. So he's saying that is saying that this is the location where the parallels relating to Galilee should be put. Since if you do this, moving those parallels, the entire anomalous group up to Luke 24:6, you will end up with the following. And so that actually fits in perfectly then if you do that. So that makes sense. I'm not sure. I think it's kind of in the weeds, though, because the pattern is still there regardless. And, that's what I'm most interested in, is not the minutia about the pattern, but just like show us the parallels. Let's go through all these parallels bit by bit, and let's really see if all the dots that you say are there, are they really there? The final pattern, if you move the anomalous group up to the position corresponding to Luke 24, nearly the very top of the chart. So the things that are kind of left of the V are now moved up, and they kind of fill in the T a little bit, and they also work to fill in the V, the upper left part of the V, a little bit as well. Okay, I'm going to try to turn the page, which is a hold for processing moment. And okay, could be on this page forever. Looks like there's about 3,000 words on the one page. But this is the beginning of chapter 3, which is called Jesus' Story as a Hidden Parody of Titus and Vespasian. So hopefully this is what I was looking for, but kind of a demonstration of the different parodies. And I will explain the apparent meanings behind the APT-VS pattern later. But having given an overview of my thesis and one strong parallel, I will now describe more of the sequence of parallels between Luke and Jewish war, focusing mainly on those between Jesus and the Flavian emperors Vespasian and Titus. I previously described one example, but it's important to demonstrate that this was a small part of a much longer and incredibly detailed parody, which spans second half of Jewish war and the entirety of Luke. It is also important to show that a large number of these parallels occur in much the same order in the two documents. Okay, now he's got a chart that one of the headings is Titus and Vespasian's victories and ethnic cleansing in Judea, story in Jewish war, or Wars of the Jews. And on the other side, he has Jesus' ministry parodying the story in Luke. Okay, so this is all the stuff that where the book of Luke is actually parodying the story in Jewish war. So now he's citing Jewish war, paragraph 389, and also paragraph 393. And it says, expecting a battle with John. John is one of the zealots in Wars of the Jews, one of the Jews. Expecting a battle with John, Vespasian, described in Jewish war as their lord, had his men go abroad, making the road even and straight, and where rough, be made smooth or planed. He frightens John's men, implicitly giving them time to repent. John flees, going before him from Judea down the Jordan, and John's men were violently drowned in the Jordan. Okay, now it's hard to say that this is the parallel here coming from Luke, because it's not like in the same box exactly, but it's across in the chart. So this is coming from Luke. First is Luke 1, verse 76, and then Luke 3, verses 3 through 5. John will go before, oh boy, it looks like the word is lamb. I'm sorry, I can't pick out the last word here. John will go before the Lord, making paths straight, and rough ways will be made smooth. That exact phrase is in Wars of the Jews, apparently, where rough be made smooth. Vespasian had his men Vespasian had his men go ahead, making the road even and straight, and where rough be made smooth. I can't really tell if that's an exact quote. He frightens John's men. John flees, going before him from Judea down the Jordan, and John's men were violently drowned in the Jordan. And that's Luke 3, 3 through 5. He preached baptism and repentance. And they went out of Judea, out from Judea, being baptized of him, and plunged into the river Jordan. Okay, now we're going to Jewish War, paragraph 421. And this is book 3, chapter 7, paragraph 31. As the Jews fled back to Jaffa, which had 2 walls, their fellow citizens shut them out of the inner wall, and the Romans shut the outer. So they died at the hands of their fellow citizens and died by their own swords. And parenthetically, Menescott says, near Capernaum, the Jews implicitly spared Vespasian the effort by killing themselves, which from his perspective fixed the issue described in Jewish War. That is, the Jews were everywhere perverted or sick. And then, back to the text, the Romans climbed the walls of Jaffa on every side, and Galileans opposed them from above, but soon gave up, meaning they failed, allowing Titus's men to leap into the city. And then I guess this is corresponded by Luke 4, Luke chapter 4, verses 23 through 9. Jesus spoke of the proverb, "Physician, heal thyself. What was done in Capernaum, do also here in your country." And then it says, they led him to the brow of the hill, seeking to throw Jesus down the precipice. At the brow of the hill their city was built on, but he passed through the midst of them, meaning they failed. Okay, I can see the parallels there. They're not really striking by any stretch of the imagination, but they do exist. And, you know, that's kind of the nature of this. There are so many different parallels. Some of them are very obvious. Most of them are hidden. Some of them are thick, and some of them are thin. Some of them that some of them are probably actually quite weak. But let's see what he says here. Jewish War, paragraphs 424, 433, 438, 496, 619, 633, 644, 647, and 684, to crudely summarize each of the paragraphs listed above, also claims that as he overcame the walls of each hilltop city to conquer them, there were spontaneous mass Jewish suicides that effectively spared Vespasian or his son Titus the effort of massacring them. And they see that as a fix or a healing, ethnic cleansing. So all of those verses also fit into this same. So you put a dot at each one of those places corresponding to Luke chapter 4, verses 23 to 29. So where Luke 4 is on your graph, you put dots at 424, 433, 438, 496, 619, 633, 647, and 684, because they all talk about somebody trying to climb the walls and, the Romans climbing the walls and spontaneous mass Jewish suicides that spared the Romans the effort of having to kill the Jews. The Jews killed themselves. That's very much the level of a mockery and the level of really kind of grim, sometimes disgusting humor that the Romans used in the Gospels, or in Wars of the Jews and the Gospels, where they see the Jews as fishes, swine, and they see them as a sickness. And so when they kill them, they feel like they're eradicating a sickness. So this is all right in the Gospels, and it's no wonder that people would call these documents anti-Semitic. But, we will, though, eventually find out that there really is no such thing, because the whole Old Testament is also fake, but we haven't gotten there yet. So let's just summarize what he says are the parallels here, and then we'll call it a day here. The similarities between the stories are, again, numerous. A lord has at least one man go ahead straightening the path, and John goes ahead of this lord. He didn't really clarify that with the John the Baptist part, but that's also part of it. But the John the Baptist part, well, he did talk about the baptism. So, okay, a lord has at least one man go ahead straightening the path, and John goes ahead of this lord. He has paths made straight and the rough ways made smooth. The Jews are encouraged to repentance. John's people went out through Judea to the Jordan and are plunged into the river Jordan. Whether that is the Jews or whether it's the people getting baptized. Near Capernaum, people who are implied as sick cure themselves, meaning they all died if they're Jews. And he went to the edge of their city, to the brow of the hill it was on, and they sought to throw him down the precipice, but they failed. And he passed through the midst of them and went his way. So that's kind of the summary of those parallels. So you can kind of weigh it out for yourself to see if this makes sense to you or not. And that will do it for today. Thanks for tuning in.